Okay, Savio, go.
Yes, all right. Okay, so, well, bom dia, good morning, boa tarde, good afternoon. So it's a great pleasure to be back with our meetings of our ILF Brasil-UFBA research group. And today we have, yes, all right. Okay, so today we have the pleasure of having with us a very special guest speaker, Dr. Kurt Kohn, and we have been interacting with Kurt for some time already, and we are very happy that he accepted our invitation to start 2022, as we would say in Brazil, with a golden key, uma chave de ouro. So first of all, also welcome the audience on our YouTube channel, the Café Multilingüe do Nupel. And we are very happy to have also, different people from different places, including our colleagues who are in Portugal, in Évora. So it's a great pleasure to start the year with our meetings. So I'm going to introduce Dr. Kurt Kohn, and then after this introduction, he will talk about the topic that he chose and also the text that he sent to us. And after his talk, we are going to take, as usual, we take questions from the group in the room and also from the audience. So please prepare your questions and comments because the topic is very exciting. Hello, Jaciara. Dr. Kurt Kohn is Professor Emeritus of Applied Linguistics at the University of, I don't know if this is the right pronunciation, Kurt, Tübingen in Germany.
Yeah. Excellent.
And, thank you. And his research interests include English as a lingua franca, ELT, call, intercultural telecollaboration. He has published extensively and informed by a socio-constructivist view. I could say other research interests like online intercultural communication, English as a lingua franca and lingua franca pedagogy, English language teaching, and foreign language teacher education. So based on European research projects that Kurt has led and also participated in, so I'm going to list here a couple of articles. There are several and also chapters that you can find, especially on ELF. So a pedagogical space for ELF in the English classroom, 2015. My English, a socio-constructivist perspective on ELF, that was published in the GELF in 2018. The book chapter towards the reconciliation of ELF and EFL in the volume English as a Lingua Franca for EFL Contexts, where Julie and I had the pleasure to participate also. Also learner agency and non-native speaker identity in pedagogical lingua franca conversations in 2017, and many others. So Dr. Kohn also participated or led project EU, European Union project activities in the project TECOLA, which is pedagogical differentiation through telecollaboration and gaming for intercultural and content integrated language teaching. So that lasted for 3 years from 2016 to 2019. And Kurt, if you'd like to talk a little bit more about the project, that would be great. And we can have access to the website that I believe it's still active. Right. And also, yes, and TILA, which is telecollaboration for intercultural language acquisition from January 13 to June 2015. So Dr. Kohn is also the founding director since 1998 of the Steinbeis Transfer Center Language Learning Media. So I could, of course, spend here hours talking about the contributions that Dr. Kurt Kohn has given to, to our area, applied linguistics. But I'm going to be short because I think we all are very eager to listen to Kurt. So Kurt, thank you very much for being here. It's really an honor and a pleasure. So the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Savio, for your kind words. It's a great pleasure for me to be here. So I'm really looking forward to this discussion, and let's make it as interactive as possible. So if you feel like interrupting me to come in with a comment, I mean, please feel free to do so. I'm going to share the screen now. Okay, is everything okay? Can you see the slides? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So, yes, I would like to, so it's my English, a social constructivist perspective on GE-ELF, General Englishes, and ELF pedagogy. I would like to start with, see, we tried it out before. And now it doesn't work.
It's not moving?
No. Why not?
Then you can, oh, there it goes.
Let's see, so maybe it works now. So I would like to start with a few observations and conclusions regarding this general GEE deficit perspective on ELT. The first fact is that there is a clear mismatch between the standard English focus of ELT and the creativity, heterogeneity, translingual permeability, fluidity, you name it, of GE-ELF communication. So there is, or seems to be, the obvious conclusion that teaching towards GE-ELF competence requires helping students raise their GE-ELF awareness. And the second conclusion, a little bit weaker in the literature, that teaching towards standard English does not help students develop their GE-ELF competence and should be avoided. The second fact is that when you look around in GE-ELF communication out there, you notice that speakers of all kinds of Englishes participate successfully in GE-ELF interactions, from, well, English as a foreign language to English as a second language to native speaker Englishes, and so on and so forth. And the third fact, all critics of ELT's focus on standard English that I know of have high standard English proficiency themselves, including, of course, the native speakers involved in these debates. So, obviously, the language taught in ELT is not crucial for developing GE-ELF competence. And it can obviously very well be standard English. How can we resolve this somewhat paradoxical situation? I mean, this will be the main topic of my presentation here. And here you find the reference which I sent before. Now I have some things coming up here, fortunately. Okay, so I hope this doesn't continue with the, just don't. Okay, now ELT approaches generally turn a blind eye on GELF communication. I think this is another fact. But what about ELT students? When confronted, our ELT students, when confronted with the challenges of GELF communication, challenges that might be due to linguocultural differences, to cognitive, attitudinal, and behavioral divergences, heterogeneous variation, translingual permeability, linguistic innovation and distortion, and all these things, when confronted with the challenges of GELF communication, they can build on and further adapt the translingual repertoires and communicative capabilities they have available from their lived experience with everyday, ordinary, everyday communication. We thus need to normalize GELF communication, I think, by challenging the general assumption that it is something special. It is not. And now we'll focus on a few issues concerning comprehension and production in ordinary communication. And the idea is to show that the capabilities we have available and the resources we have available and we activate indeed help us cope with ELF challenges. Did you enjoy your holiday? The beaches were crowded and the hotel was full of bugs, so taken from Blakemore, Understanding Utterances. We obviously understand an awful lot more than what is explicitly said here. Yeah, so did you enjoy your holiday? And then the beaches were crowded. The beaches, which beaches? Well, obviously the beaches where I spent my holiday were crowded. Crowded by whom? Fishermen, other tourists, and the hotel. Which hotel? The hotel where I stayed during my holiday was full of bugs. Bugs, what kind of bugs? These little creatures or spying devices? And we know from pragmatics that we actually, when understanding these utterances, we engage in contextual inferencing. And our contextual inferencing processes are incredibly powerful. Paul Grice tried to explain this with his cooperative principle and the four maxims and what he termed conversational implicatures. And then we have Sperber and Wilson's relevance theory, who distinguish between explicating and implicating. So which hotel, the hotel where I stayed during my holiday, that is an explicature. And the implicature, strong implicature of the entire statement would be, no, I didn't enjoy my holiday. Weaker implicatures might be, I will never go there again. And I warn you to go there, or cancel your booking, or something like this. And then we have other examples. I mean, this has been, of course, around, and we have a typical Widdowson here. That's the phone. I'm in the bath. Okay. So we perfectly understand what is going on in this conversation, although the key messages conveyed here are not made explicit. And it's no problem for us. Okay? We are not even aware of what we are doing here. And it's, of course, exploited for jokes like, well, toilet out of order, please use floor above. And then, in addition to contextual inferencing, which is a strategic thing, we have other strategic comprehension processes, like let it pass, wait and see. So if we are not sure and don't seem to get it, and then we wait or we'll just let it pass because we feel, oh, it's not that important. I'm not interested in what you are saying here on this topic, so I skip it. Co-construction, this also is, of course, in particular relevant in connection with production, but you need to be able to understand something, to get some inferences in order to engage in co-construction. The same with handling misunderstandings. Now, this contextual inferencing plays an important role in production as well. As a speaker, I engage in some kind of audience modeling. I need to have an idea of the repertoires my speakers might have available, or maybe not. Also translingual repertoires. And if not, then maybe I don't engage in certain translingual moves, or I will in order to maybe show off. So, and inferential comprehension capabilities, to what extent are my speakers able to understand certain implicatures? And then there is something which is usually not properly taken into account, and that is what I would like to call gradual emergence of available repertoires and inferential comprehension capabilities. Gradual emergence. It's when you speak, what we usually say is, I want to say something, and now I try to put it into words. And afterwards I say, well, this is what I wanted to say. But that is not really true. What you should say is, well, this is what I've said, and I'm happy with it. I'm satisfied with it, because I am sort of author of my talk. So what we are going to convey actually evolves in the process of speaking. And it can be a very convoluted, complex process, very messy. And it's actually similar when you write. It's just when you write, well, then the reader will not see all these stages you went through, crossing things out, shifting things around until you end up with something with which you are satisfied. So this gradual emergence of the intended meaning is something very typical, and it's something which contributes to, well, the maybe somewhat complex and messy appearance of ELF communication. It's perfectly normal. Well, another aspect of ordinary communication is trusting one's own creativity. This is essential. Another quote from Henry Widdowson: "You are proficient in a language to the extent that you possess it, make it your own, bend it to your will, assert yourself through it, rather than simply submit to the dictates of its form." So in a way, proficiency only comes with nonconformity. When you can take the initiative and strike out on your own. In school, in ELT classrooms, we usually are not encouraged to use this kind of creativity, but it is essential in ordinary communication, and it needs to be exploited in ELF pedagogy. Well, but communication, the simplest communicative exchange, will not work properly, will not work successfully, unless there is cooperativity and empathetic rapport. That's the phone, I'm in the bath, okay. Now you could easily imagine a situation where the two people involved here are embroiled in some kind of emotional fights, and this communicative exchange will not be successful. Paul Grice, he made cooperativity the very center of his model, the cooperativity principle. Sperber and Wilson, in their relevance theory, I would say, unfortunately, dropped cooperativity altogether and focused exclusively on relevance. I think this was a mistake. Without cooperativity, and in particular, not only without being cooperative, but without assuming that the other person is cooperative, communication will fail. And this, again, is essential in ELF communication. When you look at the development of intercultural communicative competence research, Byron introduced, so these things happen when I talk too energetically. I think it's okay. No. Now I have to take them out. Is it okay now with the sound? Yeah, okay. So intercultural communicative competence, according to Byron, incorporates certain attitudinal skills like tolerance for ambiguity, like empathy, openness, flexibility of behavior. When he introduced these attitudinal skills, well, he did it in connection with intercultural communicative competence. But these attitudes are relevant for communicative competence in general, in our everyday communicative exchanges. Again, this is relevant for ELF pedagogy. Now, in case you should have any doubts that what I just talked about in terms of inferential comprehension and so on and so forth does not help people cope with the challenges of ELF. Now, this is not an excerpt from an ELF conversation, but I think it serves the purpose. I'm sure you have no problems understanding this text, although at a first glance it looks messy. According to research at an English university, it doesn't matter in what order the letters in a word are. The only important thing is that the first and last letter is in the right place. It really works. Okay? So our ordinary communicative capabilities and the resources we have available make it possible for us to take successfully part in ELF communication. Now, just like ELF communication is grounded in ordinary communication, or our capability for ELF communication is grounded in our capability for ordinary communication, so is teaching for ELF communication grounded in how we acquire languages. It's actually the way we understand language learning in a behavioristic sense, in a Chomskyan sense, in a communicative sense, and so forth. The way we understand language learning shapes our understanding of language teaching. So, how do we acquire the language taught in ELT? From a social constructivist perspective, speaker learners acquire the language taught in ELT by creating their own version of it in their minds, in their hearts, in their behavior. There's just no other possibility. Yeah. by creating their own version of it. And they do it not in some idiosyncratic processing, but through communication, through translingual communication, and in cooperation with others. And it is influenced by individual forces, but at the same time by social forces. And most importantly, this process of creating my own version of the language taught is guided by my own requirements of communicative and communal success. It is in this sense that I speak of my language, my English. I can only come up with my English. And today here, I am speaking my English. And you are speaking your English. And my English, my language, can, and I think should be seen as a translingual repertoire. Very much in the old sense of Labov's studies, from aiming towards standard conventions to casual to boldly creative. So in a certain situation, I try to activate those linguistic means of expression from my English repertoire that I feel are considered okay, standard, are considered educated, or whatever the situation might be. In other situations, it's not that important, or it might even be advisable to speak in a different way, not too posh for these things. And in other situations, again, I might try out to be creative and stretch the limits and try out new things, push the borders. All in all, my English repertoire is in this sense, translingual repertoire. Now, regarding these shaping forces, of course, there are these usual suspects. Where do speaker learners come from? That is, my background is German, and you hear it in my English. What do they do? Learning approach, attitude, motivation, effort, all this has a strong impact. What are they exposed to? That is, teaching material, a teacher partner's contribution. Of course, I mean, the way ELT teaching materials are designed and sort of limited to this standard English scope has an effect, and we would argue a negative effect on the learning process. In addition to these three types of forces, there is another, fourth one, which I would argue is of central importance. Who do they want to be, the speaker learners? Who do I want to be in English? This is where my personal requirements of communicative and communal success come in. Again, there are requirements that are closer to what we usually talk about, namely, I want to express intended meanings. I want to be able to be understood. I want to understand others. But then there is also something like, I want to speak like members of a certain community. I want to engage in translanguaging within my English and maybe beyond my English. That is, involving other languages I know. I want to ensure cooperative and empathetic rapport. All these requirements kind of shape who I want to be in my English. And there is a final one, which is, of course, very important for us in a teaching learning context. I want to meet certain learning objectives. That is, learning objectives, requirements that are imposed from the outside through the curriculum to the teacher. But the important thing here is that they will only have an impact on my learning to the extent that I manage to make them my own. And this shows that teachers have a great responsibility here in not only sort of presenting requirements from the curriculum, but making students understand what they are good for, why they might be relevant for them, and so on and so forth, so that they can make them their own to a certain extent. Okay. All this, who do I want to be? This concerns a speaker internal perspective. Look at ILF research about intelligibility. All the studies I know of take a perspective from the outside. ILF speakers are intelligible, and that's fine. Yes, I see them as being intelligible. But what about them themselves? Intelligibility is not everything. There's an awful lot more that is necessary for me to meet in order to be satisfied. So speaker satisfaction is a crucial concept here in this connection. This my English perspective has certain implications for teaching English, and I would argue it can be applied to other languages taught in the classroom as well. It is in the light of this my English understanding of learning, it is necessary to change the ELT approach from a strict target language orientation, a strict quasi-behavioristic copying cloning orientation. And I would argue many teachers who are modern teachers, who talk about learner autonomy and things like that, deep down they have this concept, this sort of quasi-behavioristic understanding still incorporated. They might be tolerant with deviations, in particular if the approach is more communicative or clear, all these things. But if learners get it right, that's when they get the smiley points. So there's still this strict orientation, and we need to get away from it and to exchange it by an open social constructivist orientation, which leaves room for speaker learners to actually make English their own by drawing on all their resources, trust their creativity as emancipated non-native speakers of English, and aim for speaker satisfaction, guided by their personal requirements of communicative and communal success. So, taking all this together, it is about taking students serious as agents of their own learning, with this inside perspective. Now, what does all this imply for ELT's standard English orientation? Well, I think there is a great misunderstanding regarding standard English in the ELT classroom. The problem Now, in the light of this social constructivist perspective, the problem is not having standard English as the language taught. If that were a problem, then we would need to exclude all speakers of standard English and native speakers from ELF communication as incapable. But we don't do it. Okay? So the problem is not having standard English as the language taught. The pedagogical challenge concerns what speaker learners are allowed, encouraged, and supported to do with it in the process of learning. It is important to acknowledge and deploy speaker learners' translingual resources and requirements of success and their creativity. They should be able, after all, to like what they see in the mirror. Speaking and learning a language is about identity. The way I grew up with English in school, I didn't like what I saw in the mirror. Not at all. And all this, taking this open social constructivist perspective, this is a blind spot in ELT pedagogy, needs to be changed, and it is quite a challenge, of course. Just as an aside, rejecting standard English as unsuitable for expressing my identity is a different issue. Yeah, just think of a Kenyan writer, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, who first wrote in English and then decided to write in his Kenyan dialect because he felt that was not his language. Okay, but that is a different issue, a serious one, but a different one, which is not related to what we are talking about in connection with ELT and ELF and these things. Now, what is involved in GE-ELF competence? It's more than being intelligible. There is familiarity with means of expression that are suitable for GE-ELF comprehension. There are, most importantly, these inferential discourse skills, which help us bridge gaps in our repertoires where we don't know certain expressions, certain words, certain structures, some other ELF partner might use. And then we can gradually extend our repertoire for comprehension. There are the translingual repertoires of means of expression for my own GE-ELF production. That is a totally different ballgame. And when you look at the literature, I mean, we all have experience, or many people in research, ELF research and Global English's research have experience, deep experience as language teachers, and they know about the difference between what it takes to understand and what it takes to produce, and that there are comprehension exercises and production exercises. But with regard to our problem here, this distinction is just not being made. So I need certain means of expression in order to be able to communicate the way I would like to communicate according to my requirements. And if someone tells me, oh, I understood you, don't worry, this doesn't make me happy because I know certain words and phrases or structures are missing in my repertoire for being able to speak the way I want. Okay. Communicative translanguaging and strategic skills. This is important to practice. Trust in one's own non-native speaker creativity. sense of cooperativity, empathy, and rapport. These are very important, essential elements or qualities of G11 competence. But the big question now, how do we get there? Or better, how do we help our students get there? So there are 3 legs of teaching towards ELF competence in ELT, according to what I've just tried to discuss. Speaker learners' repertoires and capabilities available from ordinary communication. A social constructivist, my English understanding of, well, language learning and then language teaching. And, well, what I call pedagogical lingua franca immersion. It is important to provide our students with opportunities for dive into authentic ELF communication. And this is not a trivial task for the ordinary ELT classroom, not at all. So this immersive pedagogical lingua franca approach, I see it as an ELF extension, or GE-ELF extension, better, of communicative language teaching. Communicative language teaching, in a way, has stopped on this level of functional competence. But what we need is to really dive into, become immersed in authentic communication, and then become aware of what we want to do in these situations, and what we actually do and what we need to do in order to get where we want to be but are not yet. ELT students, that is the idea here, of different lingua cultural backgrounds, say from Brazil, from Germany, from France, they meet and communicate with each other using their My English repertoires as a pedagogical lingua franca. Basically, we are in a, no, but we are not in a pedagogical, we are in a communicative lingua franca situation now, but imagine having something similar for your students. As I said, it's not trivial to implement this in the regular classroom. And this is where modern technologies come in, with technologies like the one we are using right now. And so we could have video conferencing or virtual world environments, or a tool like Padlet, where you can write and read and speak and post sort of written and spoken comments and all these things, and pictures and videos. But all this needs to be embedded in a blended learning environment. So where you have preparatory activities in class and follow-up activities in class. And depending on the infrastructure you are using, you could even as a teacher be around and help. It would probably not work that well in a virtual world or in a video conference. So it should be more authentic, but in a Padlet exchange, we use it in one of our case studies, where the students in a German school and a Spanish school didn't feel comfortable enough to do it freely in a video conference. So they used Padlet, this digital wall, and they did it in class actually. And the teacher walked around and had a look and helped them. And when they were happy with their post, when they had written it or recorded it, then they would send it off to their partner. And that worked quite nicely. In our projects, we use, that's the Tecola project. Savio mentioned earlier, you have the website here, tecola.eu, where you have whole bunch of resources and information. In this case, we used discussion exchanges in small groups of pairs of students outside class to make it more authentic for them, preferably from home. And we noticed a big difference between exchanges that were conducted from, within the school environment and from within the home environment. And in particular, exchanges from within a computer lab didn't work at all. I mean, there was just not the kind of communicative privacy for this kind of exchange, like where it was about speaking and in a video conference, for instance. We used accessible topics, not high-end intercultural topics, but accessible topics where our students, while they had the kind of background knowledge, or it was easy to prepare things in class, like breakfast here, breakfast in your country, waste avoidance, an interesting sport, fashion, music, things like this. And we felt it was, in particular, initially important to have use these accessible topics, so to decrease the burden a little bit, and that students could then focus on the communicative exchange and on cooperation and empathy and all these things. Well, and there is pedagogical translanguaging. I would like to make a distinction here between pedagogical translanguaging and communicative translanguaging. So pedagogical, and others make this distinction as well. Pedagogical translanguaging, like in the sense of sandwiching, I say something in English and the student replies in German, and then I repeat what the student said in German, I repeat it in English, and so on and so forth. So you are familiar with this. Butzkamp, he explored this in great detail. Okay, so here's just a very quick look. This is on the left is Padlet and the virtual world, where students are represented by an avatar and could then communicate with each other. And we used boards, learning boards with posters, information, and pictures as a trigger for the discussion, and so on and so forth. Students, according to our case study observation, students felt very much in the same boat in this pedagogical lingua franca immersion context. They felt they are in the same boat as, well, speakers of English who were struggling to find the best way to express themselves. They engage in authentic intercultural communication and learning, and most importantly, became aware of their requirements of success. They also discussed requirements of success. So it's not necessarily the same for two partners. They engage in collaborative creation of a shared intercultural ground, like third spacing. They noticed and tried to handle divergences on these cognitive, emotional, and behavioral levels. They practiced communicative translanguaging. In our case, in particular, in order to explain certain concepts for which they did not have the English word. And interestingly enough, they also used their first language in this case, although their partner didn't understand this first language. But it kind of seemed to work. And of course, in our online environments, they have access to other tools. They looked things up in Google Translate and were able to work things out this way. Well, and they experienced and practiced like well, being in charge, agency, cooperativity, tolerance for ambiguity, empathetic rapport. Oh, I understand you. Don't feel sad. I mean, I have the same problems. So comments like these. Okay. Now, but it would be wrong to assume that putting students in such an pedagogical lingua franca immersion situation that this were enough. Not at all. So it's not that it then works, kind of pop goes the weasel. There is a strong, strong need for pedagogical mentoring. Well, I mean, there is, of course, mentoring support regarding pedagogical organization and technologies and access to technologies, but that is not very interesting. What is more interesting is to help students adopt a social constructivist perspective, understanding of learning, and as a consequence, feel responsible for their own communication and learning. And we all know that this is usually not the case at all in classrooms. So students might even no longer be interested in certain issues. They are interested in outside school just because they happen to be in school now. So feeling responsible for one's own communication and learning, and then practicing translanguaging across and beyond their translingual My English repertoire. That is, across the My English repertoire and beyond it. To negotiate requirements of success in relation to the situation, in relation to their partners, in relation to one's learning objectives. To appreciate the value of cooperation and empathetic rapport. And something which came up quite late in our studies, understand the relevance of what I call augmented communication monitoring for successful communication and learning. This is something I noticed in exchanges, for instance, in an exchange between Spanish and Taiwanese students, and quite obviously in a virtual world environment, they were speaking, and quite naturally they had great problems understanding each other because of pronunciation issues. But none of them asked, or could you say it again, I don't understand you. So there are all kinds of inhibitions, might be personal, might be cultural, might be, I don't know, because they don't know that they maybe should do it now. Or they didn't use the chat function in order to write a word that was difficult to understand, and things like that. Augmented communication monitoring goes beyond the kind of communication monitoring we engage in ordinary communication. But we all know there are limits, and then let it pass and wait and see and so on. We don't want to offend someone, and we don't want to interrupt too often. But in this situation here, if you engage in some more intensive communication monitoring, you increase the value of what you are doing for learning. So this is an interesting research topic in itself, I would say. English teacher education, on-the-job coaching, I think is very important, more important than workshops. I mean, in our experience. And teacher education should be about raising teachers' awareness, of course, of ILF communication and competence. But I wouldn't put it in the center. And in our projects, we didn't make it that strong for a very simple reason. Our teachers wouldn't have had time for coming to all these workshops and listen. And then we noticed that it was very valuable in this on-the-job coaching to make them aware of certain things, for them to become aware of certain things, and that is how they learned. That is how they learn to embrace a social constructivist, my English perspective, without all the theoretical background, where they learn to or try to adopt a more open teaching approach with room for speaker-learner emancipation, and where they experienced and reflected on pedagogical lingua franca immersion. We had one teacher, a French teacher, in that case, the target language was German, and she initially was not very happy about the lingua franca situation. So that, no, in this case, yeah, and it was an exchange between French students and Dutch students in German, because she was afraid that they might switch to English, or might learn incorrect things, or maybe not pay attention to correctness, because for her it was very important to be correct, and so on and so forth. But in the course of the exchange, from what she saw, how the students interacted and helped each other, they did not switch to English. They would rather try to resort to Google Translate and to help each other. And she became quite enthusiastic about the lingua franca approach. And this was through on-the-job coaching. There's task design for virtual pedagogical lingua franca exchanges. Kreisen is an interesting book that has come recently out. It's a PhD thesis. References and link are in the reference list. While and teachers need to acquire knowledge and skills for pedagogical mentoring. I think this is about the range of things we had in mind based on our projects. There's more on communication monitoring, but we don't need to talk about it some more. I have the references here, and well, thank you very much for the time being. I'm very much looking forward to a discussion.
Thank you, Kurt. Well, we could be here listening to you for 3 hours because there is so much to explore. Thank you very much. And I really appreciate, because you summarized a lot of what you have been saying about different topics that are all related to this very interesting idea and concept of my English. So, of course, I would like to, discuss a few things here, but we have people also here who have questions for you. But for example, I remember when I was many years ago, when and probably a lot of our colleagues would have that, we would be addressed, for example, by our teacher, our students, teacher, what English do you teach? And then, of course, we would be, the expected answer was would be either American Standard English or British Standard English. And then along the years, I learned to respond my English. So that's what I teach, even though I did not make clear, or even at that time, I didn't have the idea that it encompassed so many things that you make clear here based on an ELF perspective. So, of course, this with time, and then you mentioned that there are many aspects involved in this, in making, let's say, the whole elaboration work, especially from the teacher perspective. And then I would like to ask you, of course, you mentioned there at the very end, the importance of mentoring, and also I like the idea of this on-the-job coaching, etc. But how would you envision, for example, if we step back a little bit, would you think that would be possible for us, for example, to really insert, let's say, elaborations like this in curriculum design, for example, for teacher education, even when we are, let's say, at pre-service level? Because then what happens, I don't know about Germany, but in Brazil, it's very common to have English teachers who already teach, and they come to the university with all those ideas that are basically EFL oriented. So then how do you see, for example, implementing such elaborations in the, this whole discussion in teacher education at the university level, at pre-service level? So because what happens, what I want to mean is that sometimes the resistance begins with teacher educators, because as you mentioned brilliantly here, the, let's say, standard orientation in EFL, so then it's still very strong. And then this is the first question. The second one, I'd like you to explore two things that I think there is a keyword here in your text that I really like, because it comes from the idea of, what Paulo Freire has, emphasized a lot in education, which is emancipation. How emancipating, in your view, is my English elaboration? And finally, how, if you see as, and how, to what extent is the my English, let's say, is my English decolonizing? So I don't know if I made myself clear, but I have three questions. One is the implication for teacher education, and the other one is this whole idea of emancipation and how decolonizing. I think you can put the two together. But thank you very much for this wonderful presentation, Kurt.
Yeah, I think it's. Of course. I know all these problems and all the resistance with which all these things are met, and I think what I noticed from discussions with teacher educators and teachers in Germany, and also my own students, and in particular at the beginning when I started doing courses about lingua franca or ELF and ELF pedagogy, I think has to do with this misunderstanding. You mentioned again that many teachers and teacher educators, they still have this standard orientation. Well, I would say having a standard orientation is not bad.
Yeah.
The problem starts with what you do with it. What do you allow your students do with it? And in order to, because I think in a way it's a fact that around the world in ELT classrooms, we have some kind of standard. It's of course mediated by the social cultural context. So in Germany, it's on the book level, it's and curriculum level, it's British, American. Well, but then you have the teachers in the classroom. And in Germany, we have, Germans who work as teachers. And if they come from a dialect area, like ours here where I live, then, it shows in their English. So you have all this. And it's mediated in many ways. And so I think it's important then to understand, or to make teacher educators and teachers understand this social cultural perspective on learning, to really understand that there is no other possibility for students to learn a language than to create their own version of it. And their own version will inevitably be influenced by where they come from and all these things, and then in particular by who they want to be. I think this is important to to get across, and might not be easy. But I think this is the very crucial point. What I noticed in debates with one teacher educator who took part in our final oral exams for our students, so state exam, and so she knew all these things. So we had been discussing this for a long time.
Right.
And then one day she asked me, well, do you want me to teach incorrect English?
That's right.
So she hadn't got it. I don't want to teach incorrect English.
Exactly. Exactly.
According to the book, I would try to teach correct English. But the point is now, what do I allow my students to do with it in
Absolutely.
this? And this is where emancipation comes in. I mean, this is a deeply emancipatory concept. And I think with regard to, and I think this is the very essence, understanding this social constructivist perspective on learning and the implications it has for teaching. So if you teach in a strict fashion, towards correct English, then you teach in a way against how learning works. And so when I talk about they create their own version of the target language, it's not an option. It's not an option. Nobody could say, no, I don't want this. This is the only possibility for us human beings. And it's not only with regard to language learning, it's with regard to other kinds of learning as well. We have to create our own version of it. And I think this needs to sink in. And then the implications for teaching, that you have to acknowledge this as a teacher, and then have to think of ways of building it into your teaching and learning activities. And I think in this connection, it is, and of course we have testing, okay? And I think in this connection, it is very important to think of something like, let's call it horses for courses pedagogy. There are horses for courses. There are parts in the classroom. There are certain activities where I say, okay, now guys, I want you to get it right. I want you to get the gerund right.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And then we have a little test on this, and you need to get it right. Otherwise, you don't score that well. But then there are other phases in the classroom where I say, okay, now the focus is on communicating. And of course, I would like you to get things right, but it's less important than in the other part.
So the process would be more important than the product at this sense, right? The process.
Yes, and the product would be dependent on the type of activity.
Right.
And it's also for students then to, I mean, this is part of teaching, I think, to make students understand that the way they communicate, that this is not irrelevant out there. That is for reaching certain goals, real life goals out there, it might be important to, get closer to the standard. And maybe for other goals, it might be better not to get too close to the standard. So that it's situation sensitivity needs to be built in. And I think in terms of pedagogy, horses for courses, that it's a more complex thing.
So Kurt, you agree with me that we should have such topics as in the curricula of teacher education, because these topics are still very peripheral. And I advocate that we have, like in our curricula, topics like this, not only ELF, but also, other issues related to what, in a way, it would enlarge, the information that especially pre-service teachers would have to, because I think even in applied linguistics, these topics, when I look at curricula, well, in my reality, they're still peripheral, you see?
Yeah.
So I truly believe that no matter what, these issues, so we need to include in the teacher education curricula formally, not informally, as it usually happens.
Yeah, and I think, formally, that's interesting. I know it from your publications and what Kelly talked about in essence, that you have this discrepancy between what is spelled out in the formal curriculum and what is the reality in the classroom. And I would say it's the same in Germany. I mean, in our formal curriculum, we have English as a lingua franca, and we have intercultural communication and all these things. But in class, it just doesn't materialize, because probably people wouldn't know, or many teachers wouldn't know what to do with it. And but with regard to, again, this I think the greatest obstacle is this misunderstanding. And I have found that it is extremely difficult to overcome this misunderstanding, that, say, you talk about ELF pedagogy, or maybe I talk about this open social constructivist approach, leaving room for students to develop their own and all these things. Teachers and teacher educators will most likely misunderstand this in the sense as, oh, so you want to teach incorrect English.
Incorrect English, yes.
And that is not the case. It is just this difference. I mean, you remember from the old days, Pitt Corder, this famous article, 1967, significance of learner errors, significance, where he made this distinction between input and intake.
Intake, yes.
And this is something which is, I think, our teachers and teacher educators should better understand what this is about. Input and intake. I mean, like look at someone giving a lecture and running out of time, and what does he do, or she? Speaks faster to get the input across, but the intake decreases. So in our pedagogical activities, it's so much input focused. And what we need to understand is that, well, learning actually results in intake.
Intake, yes, absolutely.
And intake is influenced by many other things, in addition to input.
Right, yeah, you're right. Well,
so I think this misunderstanding is a big problem, and somehow we need to find ways of in
it's the same thing here, Kurt. We hear the same thing. Now we can teach anything. We can teach wrong English. We don't correct anything. So we hear the same thing. But anyway, I'm going to pass on to Danielle. Thank you, Kurt. Thank you very much. So Danielle can lead us here with the questions and comments from the other colleagues. Thank you very much.
First of all, thank you, Professor Kurt. It was amazing. And we have questions here. The first one would be Poliana's. Poliana, please.
Hello, everyone. Hi, Professor Kurt. Many thanks for such inspiring and informative talk. Based on my experience as an English teacher, I think the idea of my English is key. I firmly agree that the students can only acquire a language through their own version of the language. But my question today is related to one specific aspect I was curious about when reading the text you sent us. On the text long, you used G, Global Englishes, and ELF as equivalent terms. In your view, do these terms represent the same phenomena, or they are different in some point?
it's a bit difficult. I don't actually use them as equivalent. So I say GE slash ELF. And I think GE ELF covers a broader range of also research discussions in the field. There is clearly a difference between global Englishes and ELF, namely that ELF explicitly focuses on ELF communication. So ELF is a way of communicating, a way of using English under ELF conditions. ELF is not a variety. I mean, that was that was in the early stages of ELF. There were some voices in this direction, but I think this has come to an end. In an ELF discussion or ELF conversation, like now, I do not use a specific ELF variety. I use my English. And so it's about communication. Global Englishes has both aspects. So it's on the one hand, it's also global Englishes communication, but then there are also global Englishes varieties. So in the outer circle, Indian English and so forth, so the Kashruvian varieties, what is discussed in connection with world Englishes. So global Englishes in this sense is broader, encompasses varieties of English other than so the other Englishes, other than standard English, and also global Englishes communication. And the reason why I use this sort of global Englishes as a GE-ELF communication is to, because the people who are reading these papers or listening to talks, they might come from different backgrounds, and then I think it would be sad if ELF researchers would not listen to for global Englishes researchers and the other way around. Okay, so I just want to spread things a bit, and I see GE-ELF communication as a bit broader than
right. Got it. Many thanks for clarifying this point.
I was going to go to a question on YouTube, but Kelly says she want to make a comment, right, on the question that Poliana just made, right, Kelly?
Yes, Polly, thank you. It would be my question, so there is no need to ask it again. But I would like to make a very small comment. This paper is going to be timeless, Kurt. Thank you very much, because the paper is about something that some topics that are timeless. It is about performing in another language, self-esteem and confidence in another language. We're gonna be talking about this forever and ever, because we are always chasing this mythical standard. And then I believe me, this paper is really relevant and essential for us. And I probably, maybe, I finally got the idea of being satisfied with my English, because you have mentioned this word sometimes in your paper, being satisfied. Satisfaction is a key word. And you also mentioned something very relevant, liberation. So I was reflecting upon that. When am I going to be able to set my students free from this standard English, from this imaginary, mythical standard English? But then you gave me the answer. You said, when the speakers find themselves in this place of ownership, so this is the moment that they are going to be set free. So thank you very much for this. I'll keep this forever and ever. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly, for your nice feedback. And this again reminds me of what Savio said earlier regarding emancipation and decolonizing. I think what my English has to offer here is this inside view. because this is when, at least, I mean, from the things I read about decolonization with regard to English and it didn't have this inside perspective. It didn't have this inside perspective, and you know this recently. This I don't know what is the title. It's by Garcia and it's a manifesto, and it's about this racialized bilinguals and how we could respond to this. I searched for this. No, there's no inside perspective there. And I think the inside perspective is important. And that would be an interesting, I think, topic for further research to take this requirements of communicative and communal success and do studies with speaker learners to find out more about their requirement profiles and also in relation to certain situations and all these things. I think this is still a black spot on the chart, and this would be, in my understanding, essential. I mean, you can only have emancipation and decolonization if it takes place inside, or if you understand what is happening and what is relevant inside speaker learners.
Yeah, I think, Kurt, what you're saying, it goes exactly with what Paulo Freire says. We don't educate anybody, they educate themselves. Yeah, and we don't emancipate or decolonize anybody but themselves. Yes, this it has to come from the inside. We can open doors, we can, shed some light, but we cannot do anything for anybody, you see? Yeah. So that's exactly, you're right.
Yeah.
So let's move to YouTube, and then we're going to go back because Jean has a question too, right, Jean? We're going to go back. Let's, on YouTube, Ian, I don't know if MacM or MCM. I'm sorry,
Ian McMaster.
McMaster, Ian. I'm sorry, Ian. Ian McMaster.
Hi,
he
Ian.
Said, "Hi, Kurt. Always good to listen to you. What is your experience of how students react to the concept of my English? Do they find it liberating, exciting, confusing, other emotions?"
I think this is, this is a very good question, Ian, because I briefly mentioned my early experience when I started at Tübingen University. My courses in my seminars started talking about English as a lingua franca and pedagogical implications. And among our English students, we always have students who really are into receive pronunciation and really want to get it right. And I had a hard time at the beginning to get this idea across to them, because they felt I was going to take their beautiful English away from them. But then gradually over time, this vanished and there was no problem. I think the important thing again is this misunderstanding that really understanding what it means, that learning is developing your own version of it. And I think once you manage to get this across to your students or to the teachers, then you have then you are on safe ground, and then you can continue.
Great, thank you, Professor Kohn. And now Jean has a question. Jean is here with us. Jean, please.
Thank you, Daniel, and thanks, Professor Kurt, for the great presentation as usual. And my question is actually, it follows on the discussions that's been going, because it's about speaker satisfaction, actually. and what you've just said. Like I was teaching a class recently, and I went to great lengths to raise students' awareness of international English and how it's used. And it was a well-informed audience, like the students were well-informed. And so I was talking about like ELF communication, showed examples, videos, interviews, and so on. But then later, one student turned to me and said like, Jean, but I like BBC English. So I like the BBC English. So I think it's what Professor just said, like, it's not that we are trying to take it away from them. And I think for me was liberating actually to hear that the standard English is not the culprit, right? Like, so it's not like, it's not standard English that is the problem. No. If a student, like, if they really want to speak BBC English, okay, like go ahead and try.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
Yeah. So and then thinking about that, because that made me like, that took me aback a bit, and I was like, okay, so now how do I deal with it? So I started thinking about the focus of needs analysis. And then I was thinking, okay, so what I have to do is like keep doing like an ongoing needs analysis throughout the course and see, because some like they don't have those aims like to speak like standard, right? Like they are happy with the way they speak and so on. So I was thinking about that, and then I would like to ask if you think like this, like an ongoing needs analysis, is it what you meant like when you talked about the constant monitoring? Would it be similar to that somehow, or would it be interrelated?
No, maybe it's kind of related, but it's not what I had in mind there. And in this connection here, what you are talking about, I wouldn't talk about needs analysis. I would talk about becoming aware of one's requirements of communicative and communal success, and that is I think the important part of this immersive experience, that you become aware of your requirements, of what you want to achieve in these situations, and that is different. It's related to needs analysis, but it's again different. Along the lines of external perspective, internal perspective. Right, so a needs analysis is more often than not, it's from the outside. I mean, when you look at research about the learners' needs, then it's people talking about learners' needs, but not about learners' requirements, the requirements of success they impose on themselves. So I think this is the point, and I think it's indeed important to look at it throughout the immersion experience. In one of our exchanges, and that was again this where the target language was German, and then the Dutch and the French, and the French were very good in German, very excellent, and very much focused on getting things right, of course, and the Dutch were not that much focused on getting things right. And the interesting thing was that one of the students said in our interviews, said, she noticed that the French students, that their German was much better than hers, and now she wanted to get better herself. You see, so this is all about requirements, and I think this is with regard to monitoring. That's a different thing. It's like what we noticed in our exchanges was that students basically mainly monitored for comprehension, for production, the way they would do in everyday communication. That is, you would maybe ask if you haven't understood, but maybe not always. It's more about if you had problems to express yourself, then maybe you would try to elicit help, but you would never really monitor the other person's production and maybe criticize or things like that. There was no monitoring whatsoever regarding cooperation, empathy, empathetic rapport, and these things. Of course, this would be very, very touchy. So I think that's why it's pedagogical, or what I said, it's augmented communication monitoring, not necessarily something you would do all the time in everyday communication, maybe in some situations, but here in this pedagogical context, because it increases the learning opportunities. And if you don't engage in these things, well, then you have poorer learning opportunities. And it's essential to make this a part of pedagogical mentoring. So students wouldn't do it just on their own, but you have to, get it across to them, and so that they also say understand why maybe the other person is now interrupting all the time, which otherwise you would feel is not positive, but in this way it is. So it's
Thank you.
Sorry, so
thank you very much.
Needs analysis, monitoring, requirements of success.
So let's go back to YouTube. We have a question from Mona Flogenfeld, and she writes, do you see a difference between teaching oral and written modes of English when it comes to acceptance of different My Englishes?
Hello, Mona. Well, yeah, I mean, there are differences. I think in the spoken mode, maybe my requirements wouldn't be, I mean, like now in this situation, which is kind of between formal and informal. So I think we all would like to get things more or less right. But then if we don't, and I think in many cases I don't get things right, or it starts getting messy right now. But then it's part of, well, the oral exchange, and that is okay. But in the written mode, well, it's different just because but now I'm speaking of written mode like letter writing or essay writing or things like that, not chat writing. That is different again because it's kind of in between, and as we all know, strongly influenced by the spoken mode because it's more. But in these other modes of writing, what you deliver is the end result. And the process, how you got there, is no longer part of the end result. But in spoken exchanges, well, the process is kind of, part of the end result. And there are different requirements, of course. If you wanted to speak like you would want to write, then maybe you wouldn't open your mouth.
Okay, great. Thank you.
But these are very different modes, as we all know. I mean, if just take a recording of a spoken exchange and read the recording, and it's terribly difficult to understand, maybe, just because it's a different mode. And take a written mode and speak it like in a lecture, which is read. Well, then the intake we talked about earlier will be very low. People won't understand as much as when it is spoken. So there are different modes with different specific requirements, and then situation specific. So it's
right. Thank you, Professor Kohn. We have a question from Lenizinha 551. I love those YouTube nicknames. It would be like Little Lenny 551. And she asks, she says, thank you, Sabi, for organizing this event. Thank you, Kurt, for the very interesting presentation. And her question is, how do academics in Germany see ELF pedagogy, in your opinion? And she adds, she says that I'm asking if there is acceptance for ELF in all departments of Anglistik and Amerikanistik, I'm sorry for my German, around the country.
I would say we are pretty much all in the same boat. It's a long way to go. I mean, to really find acceptance of this, and more specifically, making it work in practice. And I think it needs a lot more research on what you actually do. So it's fairly easy to say, as a teacher, you should enable your students to develop their own voice. But what the heck are you doing then in order to make this possible? That's not trivial at all. And this is this is again where what we talked about earlier would come in with sort of horses for courses, pedagogy, that it's not sort of this kind of unitary way of looking at learning and teaching. And it's also important to translanguaging. I briefly mentioned that my English has a translingual quality, so I can adapt my English output in production, so to speak. I can adapt it to different situations. That is, I can make it closer to the standard, or more creative, or more casual. Sometimes I don't really have it under my control, and then it's a problem whether I am still happy with it or not. Again, it depends on the situation and all these things. With regard to acceptance, I think these things we are discussing here. As you notice, they are not part of ELF teacher education as it is currently discussed, right? ELF teacher education as currently discussed has a very strong focus on looking at ELF communication out there and making students and teachers aware of how ELF communication works out there. And you might get the impression from some publications that how ELF communication, what you can observe out there, should be taken as a model. That, I would say, is outright wrong.
Yes, it's a paradox.
Outright wrong.
Yes,
yeah,
yes,
this is, I don't want to talk like people out there. No. And from what I said about how we understand, comprehension and production, in particular production, I think it's perfectly clear that what we observe out there, it's the surface of performance. It's not the underlying processes, like this production process of developing your ideas, your intended meaning as you go along. No, it's, you observe it as an end result, and that is not at all a model for my own speaking. So we need in teacher education regarding ELF pedagogy, we need a deeper, a stronger focus on understanding how communication works in terms of what I just said: comprehension, production, creativity, cooperativity, empathy, and all these things. And we need a better understanding, or at least at all, an understanding of a social constructivist perspective of learning. What does it mean to learn a language? Yeah, if you tell teachers about ELF communication out there, and they don't understand how communication works, and they don't understand how learning works,
nothing will happen.
No.
Yes, it's just like we don't. Sorry, Kurt. We don't want to replace one model with another one, right?
No. Well, at least not. I mean, this is not.
That's not the point. Yeah.
I mean, my own English productions, I wouldn't take them as a model for my own learning.
Exactly. And if we say,
it's rather that I observe myself, and then I notice what goes well and what doesn't go well, or what goes wrong, and I compare it with my requirements, and all this feeds into my learning, right?
Yeah. But, if we say ELF is emergent, so then how it's not? We're not talking about modeling anything. You're right. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think the point is, it's not just ELF. It's our English encompasses, or if when we talk in our native language, it's the same. Yeah. So it's I really like I really like when you emphasize that it's not only intelligibility. There are many other factors around the whole stuff. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, this is also back to requirements. I mean, you all, I think, had this experience that you were in a real conversation somewhere and you were trying to say things, and then people would applaud you and say, "Oh, wonderful. I mean, great. I mean, the way you speak English." And you yourself, you were not satisfied at all. And why? Because you knew what you wanted to achieve. The others didn't know what you wanted to achieve. They saw the end result and said, "Okay, it's fine. I can understand you." But no, you want more. I mean, you want to express yourself. It's, again, identity. And this is where, this internal perspective, your internal requirements come in. And all this needs to be taken on board. And I think it's a long way to get this into teacher education, and that's my point, Kurt. It's I see this as extremely important to go into teacher education. So absolutely. Danielle, do we have any other? It's 10 before the hour. Any other questions?
Juliana wrote something very interesting about this debate, discussion on standard English. She wrote that there is room for standard English accuracy, and there's room for freestyle communication. Yes. That's why I think standard English can be treated as ESP, as English for specific purposes. Just a comment.
Yeah. I mean, I would agree with the first part of your comment, but not necessarily with the second part, because that would make standard English then sort of something special as ESP, and I think it's just that. So it's whatever the standard or the teaching standard is. It's we need to shift over to what learners do with it, and how learning works, and how we can best support students in order to achieve what they want to achieve.
And Juliana, you should be here with us discussing this. She's watching on YouTube. And Lou is here. Lou wrote something very interesting here in Zoom, right?
Yes. You were saying about like not having a model, not having a standard English model, or we don't want that teachers have one model, one unique model to work with. We want them to understand the variety, the flexibility, and how English works when you want to communicate with somebody. That's what we want the teachers to do when we think about teachers' education. But that's why it's so difficult to work with teachers or teachers' education, because we seem to have an need, or teachers seem to have an need to have a specific model. So when they ask me, Professor, but how can I teach if I don't have a model? Now, if I don't look at something to teach for my students, So it's something that they need internally to feel kind of secure to teach. So that's why it is so difficult to change this mentality in teachers' education. I don't know.
But maybe it might be that we have another misunderstanding here. So I have no problems. I mean, on the contrary, I would say, yes, in school, in ELT classrooms, we have, well, let's call it the language taught. And how it is sort of specified in the curriculum or in the textbook, and the variation comes in the learning process, in this social constructivist process of my students, they will not repeat this input like parrots, but they will come up with their own, and then that is where things come up, and where I can make them aware of situation dependencies and things like this, so that in certain situations it would be better to stay closer to the model, and in others not, or say the language taught. I would not say that we should, in ELF pedagogy, should sort of kind of dissolve the standard taught. I mean, neither for the teachers nor for the students. I mean, students, they would, if you tell them, you can, I mean, I'm thinking of our dancing lessons. My wife and I, we do ballroom dancing, and one of our teachers, dancing teachers, he has this habit of saying, well, now when we are practicing a certain form and a certain ending, and then he said, oh yeah, and then you can do it this way, and then you can do it that way, and I close my eyes. I don't want to see it, because it confuses me, and I want to focus on the move. I want to practice. It's something similar. I mean, I've never been a real English teacher, but I mean, I'm doing now with my grandson. I'm on remote. I do English with him, and I already find that the textbook is very rich, excellent textbook, and I find in a way it is too rich. It's for the teacher to, I mean, yeah. So so no, I think we should, in terms of language taught, we should have clear orientation, and there could be variety here, that you say, okay, if you want to speak
and still have orientation,
then you have certain contractions, or with the relative pronouns, the man who I saw, and not whom, but when you write, then you should. So variation in this sense, yes, but not that we dissolve the this idea of a teaching model. I mean, this goes again along the lines of that there's something wrong with having a standard English orientation.
Yeah.
And as I said, there's nothing wrong with having a standard English orientation as such. Where things go wrong is with the kind of this orientation. If it is a strict kind of behavioristic orientation, that is where things go wrong. And if it's an open orientation, which leaves room, and where I try to help students find their own way, that's where the flexibility and the emancipation comes in.
Thank you, Kurt, for being here too.
Arnon Alves, and he was supposed to be here with us in Zoom. He's part of the group. He wrote on YouTube, in Brazil, there is already a proposal for ELF in the curricula of basic education in high school. And according to him, it should be implemented in English teacher training courses as well. And also, no, that's it. There are no more comments, no more questions.
Yeah, but the problem, I would assume, is that the difference between what is written there with a few naked terms in the curriculum and the reality in the classroom.
To make it work, yeah.
Yeah, that's a big difference. And the question is that those people who wrote the curriculum, and when they picked the term English as a lingua franca, what is it they had in mind? I mean, is it what we are now discussing? I doubt it.
Yeah.
And so there's always this problem between the curriculum or the formal curriculum and then, well, what happens on the level of teacher education and in the course books and in the classroom. Yeah.
I think they jumped on the bandwagon.
Right, definitely. Yeah, definitely.
Basically.
Yeah.
Yeah,
definitely. And that's not enough. But you see, yeah.
But as I told you, despite these obstacles, we see as a positive strategy to have ELF there. Now we are going to see how to bring up this discussion, especially in teacher education. It's there. So what we do with that, you see. But anyway, as you say, and we have been saying this, so they basically inserted that the concept, and when we see at the practical side of the whole story, it's totally EFL oriented. So yeah, and then in terms of a strict orientation. Yes,
so I think it would be a mistake kind of criticizing this for its standard English orientation, because but of course this is my background. I mean, I grew up with standard English, so I have no problems with it. And but then it's what you allow your students do with it. That is the point.
The whole idea is not to demonize standard English, as you say, is that what do we do with that? So
what we do with it. And I mean, like what I said at the very, very beginning, I mean, what puzzled me from the from the first years when I started or became familiar with the ELF debate and so on and so forth, was that on the podium, a guy was standing telling me, as a non-native speaker, that standard native speaker English is not my cup of tea. And this guy was a native speaker speaking standard native speaker English, and a kind of English I like. Well, you don't like every type of standard native speaker English. So, and I was sitting there in the audience, and I felt like, well, one of these little natives who are taken away from the flesh pots. And that is when I started thinking about this. Well, there is something wrong. I mean, I have a standard English orientation and a kind of standard native speaker English orientation. Although I know I will never be a native speaker, but that's different. That's my orientation.
We all have that.
And at the same time, I engage in ELF communication.
Sure,
and for me, the two work perfectly well. So there must be something wrong with this criticism of standard English, in particular if it comes from a speaker who himself speaks standard English.
Exactly.
Well,
we emancipated ourselves.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you. Daniel, any other comment? And then
yes, one last comment by Ian McMaster. He wrote, neither ELF communication out there nor native speaker communication out there are good models of effective communication.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the point, right? Exactly, Ian. Yeah.
Yeah. We don't want to replace one model with another one. That's not the point. Well, it's time already. So, Kurt, I really, on behalf of this group, I really want to thank you very much for this enlightening presentation, for the fantastic text you sent us to read. And I'm sure there is a lot to explore, as you say, and hopefully we can meet again, possibly in person to continue this dialogue. So thank you very much. It was fantastic. So before we close, I'll give you the floor for you to say your last words, and also we take a picture to keep, in our memories of the meetings we have. Thank you, Poliana and Jean, for, I know that you were, I don't know if you had lunch, but anyway, and thank you for the other, the audience on YouTube. So thank you very much for this great 2 hours together that just flew by. Thank you, Kurt.
No, I mean, thank you very much. This has been a great experience. Normally you don't have this, right? I mean, like a kind of conference presentation and then this rich discussion. And I think that is when things get truly interesting and engaging. And so thank you very much for this opportunity. And I hope we can stay in touch and maybe talk some more about things to explore. There's a wealth of things out there to explore from this social constructivist perspective, this internal perspective.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, and thanks to the audience and all the contributions. Wonderful, great. You've made my day.
Thank you very much. So then I think, Daniel, now we can stop recording, and well, everybody have a great weekend, and see you next month with another ELF scholar. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
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 Well, the people here in Zoom don't